All right, let's shoot. So welcome to the live Q&A now with the topic, how you can recognize whether a horse is ready to get over the back and when it's ready to come to a working position. This is something that I'm struggling with Pura. Well, you've seen Pura a couple of years ago. And it's been an interesting process with this horse. And well, one of the things that I noticed with her now is that she offers the working frame more herself. So she comes up and she gets really light in the hand. The strides really don't change, but there's a huge difference whether I ride her with and without the bit, because when I ride her with the bit, she can get sometimes really nicely and solid. And then after, I don't know, 1 or 2 rounds, she gets super restless. But when I ride her bitless, she stays super solid and easy and really light in the hand, and she's really connected. So I was curious what your thoughts are on that.
Well, of course, the issue about, as we've talked about somewhat in the last session, is that you can stretch horses without a bit in their mouth. Certainly will. Almost every baby that I've ever started, if you allow them to, within a few minutes, will start stretching. I've shown you folks that many times with young horses that I've started. It does not take long. But getting used to a bit in the mouth is something entirely different, and some horses take longer to get used to a bit, some do not. But what we always have to remember is that no horse is ever going to be right perfectly in the mouth until the back comes up, and that is what it's all connected. So from the tail, to the mouth, you've got going through the pole. All that has to be right. If the back doesn't lift, you'll never get the engagement soft in the pole, which is why we see so many horses being ridden today broken at the third or fourth vertebrae. Because when you try to force horses into an upper level frame and they don't have the strength to do it, they will just break back in the neck, because there's a sort of natural soft spot there, if you will, in the neck of most horses between the third or fourth vertebra. So it's very easy to overflex them there. And that's what happens when you bring horses up and put them in tight side reins and all these devices that people use to force the head up. And they think that they're light. So of course, when a horse breaks back here in the neck, it's very light in your hand, because it is actually always behind the bit and will be behind the bit for the rest of its life until it's able to actually soften at the pole and soften the jaw correctly and take contact. So the point is, with your young horse, sometimes some horses just take longer. And while horses are growing, their mouths are also growing either and changing and going. I mean, sometimes we have to take those wolf teeth out and things like this. So it's always a process of getting used for a horse, getting used to carrying a bit in its mouth and responding that way. Some are going to be more sensitive than others, but that's pretty common. And just know, as long as you're doing the right things, as long as we keep, seeing the right things happening, that will just continue. I mean, I've seen horses that I put them in a long side rein the first time in a bit in their mouth, and they never open their mouth. It's just no problem for them to have a bit in the mouth. Others, go through a really long process of finally getting used to that in their mouth and settling down with it. So there's no hard or fast rule, other than, if they're still fussing with it, you've still got, maybe a little more time to work in the side reins, so the horse, and that's the point of why we use side reins. It gives, as Mr. Oliveira used to always say, the best hands in the world work just like a pair of side reins. They simply limit the length of your reins. And if your hands could be as still as a pair of side reins, your horse will soften, if it's used to going into a pair of side reins and softening nicely. And that's the point. That's why we teach them in the side reins first. And of course, the side reins, when you're just holding with your hands, unless you're awfully, awfully good and awfully strong at being able to maintain that position without, once again, there should never be any bicep involved in holding a horse. It's your triceps that fix your arm in place. So if you see your biceps bulging, you know that you're pulling back against the pull of the horse's mouth. So, but once again, that's the point of side reins, is to get the horse, used to the contact there. And they can't, they will experiment, and some will do that more than others. They'll try to pull a bit and that sort of thing. It just depends on the horse. But once again, that point is, and we're getting, of course, the point that we're making here, the point of this conversation was, when are they ready to come up from the stretch, So, they're never going to be ready to come up from the stretch until they're quiet in the mouth. I mean, that's my first indication. I don't ride a horse off a bit until, I don't really ride my horses bitless. I mean, I could, I just don't, for me, it's not it's not a stage that I go through very often unless I have a horse with an injured mouth or something like that. I just don't see much point in it. But I mean, not that there isn't, don't get me wrong here. If you guys want to ride your horse bitlessly, great. But, you know, there's nothing inherently cruel about a bit. You know, people have this idea that there's something, you know, that somehow bits are cruel, but you have to remember that all bitless bridles work off of the soft tissue around the horse's nose. Like if you're seeing these mechanical hackmores and these kind of things, you can break all of these bones in the horse's face. That's why I personally do not use lunging cavesons, you know, that people, the old guys used to use. Well, it's a metal thing going around. I mean, it's no different than a Western bosal that, you know, basically you're using that metal, you know, to punish the horse's soft tissue, you know. And I just, you know, they don't fit right half the time. You know, you have to have somebody come and fit them because they're always pulling out of the eye. So anyway, that's why I don't use traditional cavesons, because I think they are too harsh on the lower part of the horse's jaw. When I start babies, I just do it in what I call it's called a lunging halter. It's just a halter with a stiff noseband over the top, but it's not tight around the horse's nose in any kind of way. So getting back to our question here at hand is, when is the horse ready to come up? So one of the things I would always look for, and once again, with a horse as you're talking about with yours that, you know, maybe still hasn't settled on the bridle, you know, there's nothing wrong with trying to come up. And that's kind of the point too, is, you know, as soon as I get a horse stretching all the way to the ground, I'm going to start trying to bring them back up and just see what happens on a daily basis. So, you know, as you're experiencing with your horse, as they begin to change their shape and the withers comes up and the back is in the right place, they start, as I showed you, I put a clip of Q up the other day, and all of a sudden, you know, she moves in a working frame with no side reins or anything whatsoever, because her top line is there, and that's how she now moves. So it's no problem. But she was a horse that really wanted, and when we saw her in a pasture, one of the reasons we got her is she stretched all the time. She even trotting out in the field, she had her neck down and out. And we loved that about her. But at the same time, she's been she's a mare. She's built quite downhill. It's only been now, she's over 6 years old now. And it's only been now that the withers, she's finally higher at the withers than at the croup. So some horses take a long time to grow, and we have to take that into consideration. We kept trying to bring Q up, for instance, and she just was resistant. She didn't want to do it. I know now, I mean, she was still growing, and that's usually the indication. There are some horses that will be, have learned to resist the bit and this kind of things, and may be difficult to bring up. But that's the point of doing all that groundwork, getting your lunging correct, getting them lunging correctly in side reins. I always want to bring them up in the side reins, as you see me do. I put them up where your hands would be off of the D rings up above, which is a great test, because you can't pull a horse over with them like that. They still have to be quite long. So the horse could easily get its head up, and that's a good test. So if you put them up above and all the horse does is come above the bridle and go like that, well, they're not ready to do that yet, because they should maintain that stretch out into it and not curl up behind it. And that being another one of those signs. So the answer to the question is, we start to bring them, as soon as we get the stretch, we can start experimenting with bringing them up from the stretch and see if they can hold it or not. And once they can do it from the ground, then we try to do the same thing, and with the work in hand as well. You can stretch a horse with that, but you can also bring them back up into a working frame, which is one of what you want to be doing, in your working walk and working, from the ground in your groundwork. Because if I get it so I can bring them up and the gait stays the same, back doesn't change, well, then I know they're ready to start doing that, or at least to try to do it. But if your horse can't hold itself up without you on it, and this being the main point is, there's no point in even trying if the horse can't get over its back, without you up there. It's never going to be better because you put a saddle on and get on it. If the back is weak, its back is weak. And you can usually look at these horses, at this point in my life, I can walk around a stall and tell you what they're going to do by looking at how they're muscled in the stall, because the muscling of a horse tells you the whole story. They either have a top line or they don't. And once you begin to recognize that, it's pretty easy. It's pretty easy to see, when all you still see is a drop back and a U neck. Well, in my opinion, there's really no point in getting on and riding them, because I'm never going to get on a horse and try to ride it until I can at least see from the ground that its back has come up. But if I'm looking at a horse and and its withers go like that into a big dip, well, I know that it's going to take that time, to get that straightened out before I even bother, so I don't waste my time, So it's a kind of thing where we have to experiment with it right from the beginning. As I said, as soon as I get a horse to stretch down, I start trying to bring them up and see what they can do. if you have a young horse that's been, that was raised correctly, it's spent its youth out in, big fields where it's moving, and it's got a nice top line before you start, they come up pretty quickly. But we have to remember that the problem with today is that most horses are raised incorrectly. Most horses today are raised in small pens or small paddocks at best. Very few horses today get raised out on hundreds of acres of land like they used to do when I was a kid, and get that chance to develop. So we always have to remember when we're starting with these horses, if we're looking at the horse and we can see that it has a huge ewe neck and its back is dropped, well, that's about a year process at least before you're probably even going to think about getting on them, because it takes that long to build the muscle. Muscle builds very slowly, and this is, people get impatient with waiting for it to happen. That's why it's nice, like with you, you're able to start with your young horse, and by the time she's really old enough to ride, you had a horse with a back and you're ready to do something, But if you're starting with a horse, that's 17, been hollow its whole life, well, I guarantee you it's going to take at least a year, if not a year and a half to two, before you can bring them up. And that's just what we have to, those of you who aren't, professional trainers per se, have to put your professional trainer's hat and just understand, if you have a horse that isn't right, how long it's going to take you to get there. And if you're not willing to take the time, well, just sell it and get another one, because we really want, to give the horse the opportunity to get where they want. But a lot of people, and that's the problem too, is people buy horses because they want to ride. They don't want to watch them go around in circles, on a lunge line while they build them. So they get impatient, right? And that's what leads to so much damage to horses. People don't want to spend the time. They want to get on and do the fun stuff. But if you've ever done anything in your life, to a high degree, whether it's playing the piano or anything that takes a great deal of skill and effort, everything takes time. It means you want to be a long distance runner or whatever it is, you want to learn to paint, you want to learn to do anything, it's going to take you amount of time. Well, horses are the same way. So does that answer some of the question? I'll let you fill in now.
Well, one of the things that I actually went to a new teaching client last week, and I was really surprised because when she started riding, the horse was stretching down. But when I looked at the muscles of the horse, he had this really big underneck. So I was looking like, okay, you know what? Go ride the way you do it, and let's see what happens. Because I was like, okay, but he's stretching, he's working into the contact. You actually did your basics quite well. So what's going on down here? So what happened is that she started picking the horse up and like ask it to come up into a working position, and that's where I saw where that underneck was going, because she was grabbing him and holding him together. Like when I grabbed the rein to feel what the tension was, she was using her biceps. She was like pulling that horse together. So my question here is, what I did with this rider, I changed the posture. I changed the I made her put her hands more forward instead of pulling, so the horse could actually fall into the contact. And within 5 minutes, the horse got uphill into the working position. Nice. So my question here is like, what's your take on riders' position when it comes to bringing them up into the working frame? Because I notice a lot that when the rider is super unbalanced, the horse can be as muscled as and properly prepared. But when the rider is super unbalanced, it's really hard to get them into the working position at all because the rider is in the way. So what's your thought on that?
Right. And so what you have to understand is that, well, that's why it's so important. Riders who are riding the way you say, and unfortunately, this is epidemic in the world today. Most people today are learning to ride by balancing against the mouth of the horse. I see very few people going like, when I was learning how to do this, we didn't get to touch the reins. You didn't get to touch the reins of the horse until you were in balance above the horse. That's how people used to teach. But now people, because everybody wants it instantly, and of course now because our show rings and judges have all gone the same way, which is down the road of hollow horses that can be quickly pulled into phony frames and shown. People are, and this is the problem that we're in today, is that people are being told this is correct because they're going to horse shows and winning because of how corrupt the world of horses has become. Dressage especially. I mean, that's the really sad part about it, is that dressage was the sport that I entered because it was all about improving the horse, and you had to improve yourself to get, to get to that level. Well, now dressage has been cheapened down, so people are just taught, get on the back of the horse, hold as hard as you can, pull its neck back. And you'll notice when you said that about the neck, any of these horses that you see, most of the horses you see in the show ring today, when you see how tight they are on the neck, and they look like their back, like their top line is engaged to people who don't know what they're looking at, because they're so pulled in tight here to their chin and held. Well, of course, the top of the neck looks good, but if you let go of these horses, they immediately just go like this, and immediately you see that there's nothing there but the underside of the neck because they've been forced over. So the whole top line is not engaged. Only the top part of the neck is being sort of overly flexed like this. But at the same time, the horses still, they pull with these underside muscles. So it's the underside muscles that they're holding in kind of, tension against one another, which is what causes that problem. And as I say, so when they let go of the reins, they just immediately go up in the air. But the way I teach you guys to do it, the head and neck goes down because the back starts to come up and it brings the withers up, and the head will naturally in stretch want to go down and forward the way, it is correctly when it is done correctly. So interesting because, of course, the stretches are in, I don't know what's like over there, but in America, there's stretches in every other class all the way through fourth level. You have to stretch horses in the ring, so, and you go and you watch it, and none of them know how to do it. The trainers are, when you get to that, just let go. Well, the stretch is a double score movement. And it is because it's the foundation movement. That's why they put it into the test, because if you can't do it, it's obvious your horse is incorrectly trained and you should not be able to score very high on anything else. So if it was happening the way it should, the sport would continue to move forward in the right way. But until we can get, put all the judges in some kind of training camp somewhere and retrain them all,
that would be great. That would be great. Well, actually, what I hear a lot of riders say here about the stretch in the dressage test, it's like, it's a part we just need to get through it. And I'm like, no, like the stretch is a moment where your horse can relax. It's like a tiny break in the middle of your test. And then you can go to your second part of your test, maybe doing a little bit better than the one before because your horse had the chance to relax a little bit more. So maybe your second part of your test, you can do better because you could work back to relaxation. And they're all looking at you like you've lost your mind.
Yeah, exactly. Because, once again, what we see is a lot of excited horses now, throwing their legs in every direction, to impress people. So I don't know what the answer ultimately will be, or if it will ever change in terms of that. But that's why I've renounced my membership in the United States Equestrian Center, Equestrian Team, and all that, because I just, I'm not going to pay them money to watch what they're doing, and there's a few factors that went into that in America. One was that in about 85, we had two things that happened. A woman sued because she didn't get on the Olympic team and she had the most show points. And the Supreme Court sided with her. So that's now, so showing in America is now totally under this corporate thing, because it's simply the only way to get on our Olympic teams is to have the most show points, which means you've got to take these horses to every show in the world, ship them. It means that only the wealthiest people will ever get on the team anymore, because it costs you $500,000 to send them around to all the horse shows in order to get enough points to do it, and this kind of thing. So it's just sort of played into that thing. The other thing that happened in the mid 80s here in America was that we hired for the first time a professional CEO to run the American Horse Association, someone who was not a horseman at all. And their own goal was just to get more people paying the fees. And that's exactly what they did. They dumbed everything down and got more people in the show ring. So more people are paying the fees to the American Horse Show Association. And they're doing nothing. I remind everybody that the point of the American Horse Show Association and the point of the FEI and all of these organizations was to protect the horses at the horse shows. That's why this, the whole idea of them, was to this governing body that could protect the horses at the horse shows. But that unfortunately has stopped happening, especially now when we live in a world where, if those of you don't know that these joint injections are now legal drugging. You can inject any joint at a horse show. You can't give them 2 grams of bute, but you can have every joint in the horse's body directly injected. And that's what is keeping these horses going. And it's also why we have no older schoolmasters anymore, because by the time these horses have been shot in their hocks a few times, the hocks are completely shot. It ruins the joint. And any real medical person will tell you that. I've talked to this with many human doctors about this joint stuff. And with humans, it's against the law. They cannot inject a joint on a human being more than a couple of times because it will destroy your joint. And that's what it's doing to the horses. So,
and you need, and
unfortunately,
if you get injections, which I'm against, you really need to be aware how to rehab from that. People put horses way too quickly and unbalanced back into work, which is causing even more damage.
well, let's not forget, the joint injections are there to put the fluid. So, I've seen vets. Oh, there's no. Well, if your horse has no joint fluid, how hard are you working these horses? I mean, if you're working to the point that they have, just rest them and stop working them so hard, and their joint fluid will come back. But if you're out there grinding them, into the ground day after day after day after day after day, well, of course, that's what happens. But just know that the joint injections are not a cure, folks. They're nothing but a Band-Aid that will ultimately lead to the complete debilitation of the horse.
Yeah. So Sarah is sending a question to me. Let's see. Does every horse, when stretching, go all the way to the ground? How do you tell if they're stretching correctly on the lunge through over their back? Is it that you can really see the back come up literally? I struggle with knowing if what I see is right or not.
Okay, so that's a very good point, and one that is very misunderstood by people. So if you are working a horse, there's no such thing as stretching too deep. You'll meet many people today, oh, a horse should never be stretched below its knees and blah, this kind of thing. The reality is, if you have a horse that has no top line at all, and usually these horses are sway back to some degree or other, big U neck. As soon as we get them to release these muscles, the neck will go straight down to the ground because they have no top line at all. And that's where you want. So if your horse stretches all the way straight to the ground, now, once again, let's remember that the stretch is only the beginning. So once you get them to stretch, when you see them moving at the walk or trot, they must be swinging through their back. And if you know how to, when the horse is in a trot, we see the diagonal pairs, move on exactly the same length. When they're trotting, we see that the hocks are making a nice circle. If this were the horse's hock, it's making a nice circle, and there is rhythm. So if we see those things coupled with the horse's nose down, then we know that they're doing the right thing. There was somebody who put some little horse that they just started the other day, looked like a pony of some kind or other, and it was just working its heart out in the stretch, and that's what. But its nose was on the ground. That's where that horse needed to be. As once again, the horses, if you get them engaging through their back, and this is the hard thing that you want to recognize, that it's not just the nose going down to the ground. You can stretch a horse with a carrot or something, right, at a standstill. So they don't need to be moving. But when they stretch the head and neck down, and that's why I teach people to do this in the work in hand, once again, we're never trying to force the head down. We're teaching as the back, as we get the horse to activate, the withers come up and that pushes the head and neck will naturally want to go down into the correct position. So when you have a horse that stretches like that and the nose wants to be on the ground, that's where you leave them. And as long as you're sure that you're getting the right engagement, in other words, if you're seeing, the whatever point the neck is down and you can see that the diagonal pairs, in other words, with the legs together, are swinging exactly together and we can see the movement on the same plane. As long as you're seeing that happening, just leave their nose on the ground. And as you see, once again, you'll see the back change. Now, it's a year to a 2-year process for this to happen, depending on how bad your horse is. But I have literally taken horses that were completely sway back. Like the oldest one I've done was 27 years old. And in a year's time, I brought that horse's back all the way up flat again. Now, that horse spent that entire year with his nose just going on the ground because, once again, you don't want, and when do we bring them up? Well, if a horse is sway back, there's no point in even trying to bring them back. I'm going to work horse from the ground until its back has repaired itself. And that's the thing to understand, and most people don't understand, is that you are not stuck with what you've got. If you've got a sway back horse, it doesn't have to stay sway back. If you do this training, the back, in almost all cases, unless it was a congenital, there are some horses that have really weird congenital backs where they're born that way with a really low at the base of the withers kind of thing. And that's the problem. But most horses, because that's a general, a defect, in the actual birth defect, if you will. But the horses that became sway back because of lack of work, lack of training, any of that, if they're sound enough to work, in other words, they're sound enough to start generating that swing through the back, because the minute you can generate the swing through the back, in other words, when you can start to see the diagonal pairs in the trot swinging together and you see that hock working correctly, you know that the right thing is happening. And in time, once again, a year to a year and a half, 2 years with these really extreme ones, but know that it will happen. So I wouldn't even bother to bring them up. You know, I kind of did that with Lip, the horse we have, because he was quite swayback when we started him. He'd just been in a pasture ornament. He was 7 years old, but already quite dragging his back. And we started to bring him up, and I just decided he wasn't ready yet, and I just put him back down. And now his back is really looking great. So we'll start to bring him back up again, over the next couple of weeks and see if he's able to do it at that point. But
if you want, I can share a picture of what Pura looked like when I started and what the back looked like and what it looks like now, to
that would be great.
Show like how much of a difference it can make. So let me zoom this a little bit more. This was Pura when I just got here, which is 8 years ago, and I think about 2.5 years later is when I started Art2ride. You can actually see here that she has quite a dip here. Well, this is super hollow and had absolutely zero muscle, and this is what she looks like now. So this got all flattened out. I think her withers has come up for about 3 or 4 centimeters, and this got all filled up with muscle. She was too skinny here, but you also see that the belly here is just hanging there, and well, the back was just non-existent, and this just has become super round and filled up all over the top line. And she's 20 now. So in this picture, she was like 19 and a half. So even like, well, you know how bad she was, because this horse couldn't even canter in the field anymore. So badly her back was back then. And now I can do walk, trot, and canter. And one of the questions that I wanted to ask you as well, what your thought is on what I noticed with her is that she starts offering herself the working position. Like she is telling me like, I'm ready to come up. Is that something that you've noticed with horses as well, that at a certain point they started telling you like, I can stay here in this position. I don't really have to go all the way down. I can stay light and into the contact here. Is that something that you've noticed as well, that horses do that?
Absolutely. When they're ready to come up, they come up easily and they come up lightly and they can sustain themselves because they're now in balance. You remember that a horse that is hollow, like the first picture that you showed there, is literally like two men in a horse suit. I mean, the two ends are not communicating with one another at all, and they're not working together. I mean, it's the top line, that development of the top line muscles that allows the front and back end of the horse to work together. So if you don't, if you're not doing that, not to mention that that's what also lets the joints work correctly. So you don't need things like injections, because you got to, if you want to use that term, I never use the term biomechanics, because most of the people I see today using them seem to not know anything about biomechanics, because I see their horses like the picture that we just saw. I mean, it was an absurd, the woman's answers to Manning were just absurd in terms of what they expect, what they're thinking. It's such to think about lifting the chest and the withers without thinking about lifting the back. It's just idiocy. I mean, how is that even? So what you have to do is pull the head. They're basically trying to make the withers go the wrong direction. We want the withers to come up and go this way. The way you're riding like that, they're literally making the chest come up, but the withers are coming back this way. So the back is actually dipping more. And if you wonder why, I mean, in the world today, there's an epidemic of horses with kissing spine. Now, it's kind of interesting to think that, like, don't these people ever put any of this together? Because it's horses that are ridden like that are getting kissing spine. I mean, you can see already that one picture we see, and you see behind the saddle, you could see already that dip, which you saw fill in on your horse. Because that first picture that you showed, you could see at the hip bone, there was a little, she was starting to disconnect and the back was starting to drop. In your second picture, it's all up and it's even the way it's supposed to be.
I know, and I know that in a clinic a couple years back, I asked you, I think 5 times, like, are you sure this is going to flatten out? And you said, yes, just try to trust the process. And I was like, this guy's crazy. I don't believe it. But, I'm going to keep on going. And well, I have to say you were right, because, in the end, it did fill up. Absolutely. Yeah, so we have another question. We have another question from Michelle, because she's asking, when working with an older horse that is nervous all the time, I'm finding it difficult to do work in hand. Any suggestions to get them to relax? I have the horse going through the motions of in-hand work stretch, but grinds her teeth. Ooh, the teeth grinding is really a sign of stress and tension there.
I would ask you two things on that one. Can you hear me? I'm not sure. Am I on? Yeah.
Yeah.
The teeth grinding can be many things. I would also be, that can also be caused by a bad fitting saddle or something. So I would certainly suggest with a horse like this that you take everything else off, like the saddle and this sort of thing. So just to be sure there's nothing on the horse that could be bothering it. But, nervous horses sometimes, everything makes them nervous. So just take it slowly. You might want to just do some basic work in hand that is really just like leading. Some of you have seen me do this before, where it's just like you keep the whip in your outside hand so that you can reach back and touch the horse with it. But you just hold the reins like you would normally, a foot or so from the horse's mouth, or even just a lead rope. And you can work them that way and get quite a bit done. If that helps you, and spend a lot of time walking. A lot of horses, people who are, and this is why I always tell bad trainers from good trainers, bad trainers spend very little time walking horses. Good trainers know that the walk is as Walter Zettels, I believe, said, well, the walk is the mother of all the other gaits. So if your walk is bad, everything else is, it might be easier, the horse will go into some kind of shortened trot or want to canter. And especially if the horse is under impulse, the walk is always the hardest thing to ride, because there's no natural kind of, if you will, desire to go like there is. But once horses get over their back, you want to feel that same thing in the walk. So spend some time and maybe now this might be a horse with the tooth grinding. Once again, I would take the saddle off. It might be one you want to just work in a halter, as you say. Now the horse had something is causing this horse enough grief to want to grind its teeth. And that's usually because horse has been forced in to do something. So even sometimes when I've worked horses like that were really bad tooth grinders, they're going to kind of do that no matter what, because that's kind of become their MO in the beginning. But once I got them to stretch and really got the top line working, I was able to get rid of all the teeth grinding. So I would, to some degree, as I said, you might want to try this, just doing it at a halter, but also just know that it may just take a while for the horse to believe that what you're doing is not going to hurt it, which is why they tend to grind, because they're nervous about, which it sounds like this horse is, because they get scared of what's going to happen. They start, dreading it. So the more you show them that this is going to be something nice, I would give a horse like that, I'd give lots of treats in the ring, and give them something to eat, something that makes them feel good and comfortable, and don't make a lot of demands, and just, even as I said, just even it's coming out and just working them in a halter, just nice long walks till they just start to walk out. And sometimes with horses like that, also, it's, they've gotten, which people tell me all the time, oh, my horse is great when he's not in the ring. Well, that tells me that the horse has been forced in the ring. So the horse starting to hate going in the ring. They start to, I'm going to the ring. They're going to make me, I'm going to grind. So with a horse like that, it might be also good to take them out for walks on a trail, something, if they seem more relaxed in other places. So all of the above. So either trying to halter, get the stretch going, give it a little more time, and see if the horse will ultimately, once you get it to relax, if that doesn't solve, because remember, the grinding the teeth is just a symptom of something else, but it can also just be a symptom of that's how, they got in the habit of doing that every time someone worked them. So it can just take a while for that to disappear, but it will go away when the horse, the horse is grinding because it's thinking something bad is going to happen to it, and something it's going to hate. So it starts the grinding thing. So take your time with it, see if you can make the horse happy, and then see if the grinding doesn't go away. Yeah.
All right. So I have two little extras there, because you mentioned to keep the steps small. What I would do with a horse like this, definitely stay in a walk, have the treats. And if you just focus with the first question, just make the horse stand still, and with a tap of the whip, ask it to move the inside hind leg to the outside front leg there, and then when it moves in the right direction, praise it right away. So you make the steps super tiny, and they get praised really often and given a positive reward there. If you feel that the horse is too anxious and too stressed out, or maybe too big in the movement, when you work it in hand, then I would actually work it on the lunge. But like Will said, I would keep the horse in the walk. So, you know, I would stay a little bit close. I wouldn't give them all the length, but I would maybe, especially when the horse is nervous and can get explosive, I would just keep on asking them to walk and relax. And when they walk, I praise, then I switch sides, you know, to keep it all easy and simple. But you need to make sure that you stay safe if a horse is really nervous. I think that would be my add there.
Exactly. And just take your time. And once again, it's getting the horse to the idea, even before you're worrying about, you know, stretching it or whatever the case may be. It just needs to get happy with you being around it. And I'm saying that just put a halter on it and take it for a walk out and let it eat some grass and bring it back. So, you know, maybe you're out there with the grass and you got your whip and you just tap it and ask it to move its hips over a little bit, you know, just as she's saying, very small increments of things until the horse trusts you and trusts the work. And when it does, then the grinding will stop and it gets over. Well, once again, it has to get out of that habit in its mind. Once they start doing that, as soon as you get a hold of them, they're just, you know, as I said, they're ready to do battle because they think something is bad is going to happen to them. It's all about trust.
Yeah. I noticed that with my Spanish mare, because in Spain she was born there and they are just made scared of whips. It took really a long time for her, and she's really like, oh, but I know what we're going to do next. We're going to trot. And I'm like, no, like every time I need to take her back to the walk, because she does that under saddle as well. You know, I'm sitting and then she's already sort of trying to trot off. I'm like, hold on, we have another gate here, you know. So yeah, a lot of working and a lot of patience for them to process that I'm not going to hurt her with the whip. It just takes time for them to get resettled in that new line of experiences. So I have another question from Sarah, because we're going a little bit back to her question there. Like, I do not see good hock movement. So if I don't see good hock movement and a nice swing, what do I need to do? Just keep going and it'll get there with practice? Or is there something I need to change with my energy or my activity? Yeah, so basically, if you don't really have the hock movement and a nice swing, and I'm not really sure whether this is in the walk or in the trot, but.
Well, let's put it this way. You want to keep seeking. If you're not getting those things, you want to keep seeking them, and that comes from the stretch. So if you know you're not getting good hock action, you're probably not getting the stretch enough, because you'll see a big change when the horse finally lifts its back even a little bit when it stretch. That's why there's this rule about how far they stretch. Some horses that have never stretched and have no top line need to stretch all the way to the ground, and they will, because once they let go of the muscles that are holding them the wrong way, there is no muscle to let the neck begin to hold itself out, which is what we want to have happen. But if we let that happen, they will slowly, as they develop knot line, they naturally, and it's true, a horse that's really over its back and has a top line probably doesn't stretch much deeper than about its knees, because it's stretching out and down. But that's something you can't, you know, people get ideas of these hard and fast rules of, oh, I'll never stretch deeper than the knees. Well, you know, you have to take that with a grain of salt. Anytime somebody said nothing is ever always this way or that way, you know, there's always some gray area in there of what we're trying to achieve. But we also have to look at the horse itself. So when you say, you know, is your horse straight behind, for instance? A horse that has, you know, a very straight behind is very hard to get to move their hocks, you know. And we have to always be, I mean, that's the biggest consideration with what a horse is going to ultimately be able to do, is its motor, which is the hind end. So, I mean, horses with very straight hind legs are very hard to get to collect, because collection is all based on being able to, you know, bend the three joints of the hind legs in a relaxed way. So if their leg is naturally like a fence post, which some like quarter horses, things like this, but we see straight hind legs in all breeds and various stuff. So that's also something you have to take into consideration. So that's the kind of thing it would, you know, to really give you an answer, it'd be great to, you know, and if you put a video, you can send me a video, but you can also, that's why I have the Art2ride site. If you have a question about what's going on, put a little video up, and myself or someone else will give you some ideas before too long. And I think everybody here, and we keep it that way, it's very kind about the things that we say. We're never here to just, you know, tear anybody apart, this kind of thing. And of course, unless somebody sends us a video of them beating up the horse or yanking on its mouth or something, then of course we're going to say whatever. But you know, most people here are not doing anything like that. And the idea is, you know, to me, my whole criteria for the people that I want to teach is just people who have patience and who want to keep trying and understand that, I'm also a musician. It's like music. Horses are like, you'll never know it all. You'll never be good enough. You'll be good enough, but I'm saying you can always get better, I guess is what I'm trying to say. We're always trying to improve ourselves in any kind of artistic thing, whether it's playing the piano or riding a horse. It's a personal journey as well. Learning how to do it correctly should make you a better person, and a calmer, healthier person, which is how we'd like the world to be, right? So that's what we also have to remember today. And to me, that's the saddest thing that's happened. I go around these barns and I hear, trainers yelling things at kids, kill that horse, rip his mouth out, this kind of thing. And, I just think how sad that children would be subjected to something like that, and to be thinking, because I don't think anybody, or at least very few people, go into horses because they're cruel people. Most people want to do horses because they love them. But then they get around people who act that way around horses, and they start thinking, well, that's just how horses are, because that's what they're told. Oh, it's like the old mule skinner thing. You got to hit them in the head with a 2x4 to get their attention. Well, that's complete nonsense, and it is the same thing with training horses. Brutality is just brutality and will never lead to anything. And our safety, we always have to remember our safety. Why do we want to ride a horse that's trained like this? Because we're on an animal that could kill us at any moment. That's what you have to remember, and could kill us not just by necessarily, turning around and killing us themselves, but, nervous horses are the kind of horses that, you ride by a road and they jump out in traffic and kill people, things like that, because you can't predict what they're going to do. So having a horse relaxed and trusting you is the most important thing to your longevity, in this thing, and the health of and I've seen so many people injured as well as their horses unnecessarily because they just kind of don't understand the process, or they've been led into this idea that horses have to be made to do things, this kind of thing. Well, anything that you make to do things, that's why, like you think about slaves, slaves are always thinking about their own freedom. And when they get the opportunity to kill the master, they do, and the same thing is true of horses, is that, nobody wants to be a slave, whether they're a horse or a human being. And they're always going to rebel against that kind of tyranny, at some point. Some horses take it for longer than others, until it starts to hurt too much. But there's some people, my horse was so great, and all of a sudden my horse doesn't want to go anymore. All of a sudden my horse's ears are kicking out and everything. Well, what do you think is happening? It isn't that the horse just got a bad attitude all of a sudden. It's in pain somewhere. It can be something as simple as a saddle or bad shoes, but can also be that the hocks are now destroyed because you've been overworking it with a hollow back, and that's what's going to destroy the hocks, So there you go.
I totally agree. I think I mentioned that in the last session as well, that with my young Frisian, I really noticed how sensitive she is. But I've also started to recognize with other Frisians, they turn off when you over ask them, and when you are too harsh with them, they either get super explosive and unbearable, or they completely shut down. They're gone. You need to really kick them forward. And I think this whole idea of you need to be compassionate towards your horse. You need to realize where on the training level he is. And to answer your question there, Sarah, because she's asking, like, is it that a horse is so weak it doesn't move properly at first and it will just take a lot of time to develop them? Well, that's exactly right. And that is with young horses, but that's also with older horses that have been ridden upside down and trained upside down. Like if you want to develop them to better movement, doesn't matter whether you have a young horse or one that's developed wrongly, they need to sort of reinvent the way they use their bodies. A horse is not made to be ridden. We need to train it in such a way that it learns to use the body properly so it doesn't get destroyed when we ride them. And, we sort of against their nature to develop them properly. And we go a long way sometimes to crack the mind of the horse to get them to do what we want, but we're not really working with the horse, with understanding where he is and what he or she can and cannot give us at that time. So, and I really learned that how strongly that works with Raven, with my young Frisian, because she really pushed back. When I was in the wrong mental place, that's one, because I was stressed and overworked. So she really told me, like, if you're like this, then go somewhere else. But also, like, I really needed to listen to what she could give me. And now we're in a way like, hey, we're understanding each other. And that sometimes it really is a search, and working in hand is a way to get to that other sense of connection, so to say, and getting to know your horse there. But it's a long process.
But that's what it takes, I mean, it doesn't take any longer now than it ever did to train horses. That's the point, is that people got, it's kind of interesting when you look at the old days, that there were, I'm talking about going back to the last century, and even before, and everybody, you got, like, for circuses, for instance, the circuses originally were all equestrian. The first circuses didn't have anything but horse. It was all horses. That was the first circuses. They started adding other acts later on, but because, most people had to deal with horses, in some way or another in their lives before there were automobiles. So people who could really train horses, I mean, these, people would come out in mass to see some of these famous old trainers who'd come out to work with wild horses and things like that, because, the general public was interested. And that's one of the things that happened too, since World War II is, and especially in America more than anywhere else, is that the general public lost interest in horses at the end of World War II. The horse thing has just became something for the elite here. It never became, like, very few men after World War II, men almost stopped riding in this country because, we no longer had the military and our horses in the horse military stuff and things like this. And we no longer had polo. People don't, before World War II, polo was the #1 sport in America, long before there was football and basketball and all these things were popular. But when at the end of World War II, once again, we lost most of the horses. Most of the horses in Western world were eaten. People don't realize this, and that, when the horse business did not start to come back until the 60s. There was almost 20 years before World War II and before the horse business really started to come up again. But when it did, like I said, in America, nobody goes to horse shows here. I mean, there's no spectator. They and that was part of the thing that they did of bringing in the CEO, trying to make horse shows more attractive to people. And that's what they tried to do with dressage, to make it, fun and more exciting. And now they have people clapping during dressage tests and yelling and this kind of stuff. I mean, it's just absolutely insanity, because they've tried to cheapen it like everything else. And that's been to the detriment of the sport, unfortunately. I mean, we have to stop caring if anybody's watching, because they're not going to be. So, but that's also led to a lot of the degradation too, because the general public isn't paying any attention to any of this any longer. I mean, the general public knows nothing about what's going on in the horse shows. They don't care. It's like a world that's outside of them, into its own little thing. And so, most people are not paying attention, if that makes any sense, to what's going on, and it somewhat has led to the degradation of it as well. Yeah.
All right. Okay, we have Manning. She is asking a question: with lunching with the line over the paw versus attached to the bit, is there a reason for the difference, or is it based on what's comfortable for the horse? Well, all my young horses and all the horses that I'm starting to stretch, I all lunge them with the line over the paw, because, well, for once, you're working into both sides of the corner of the mouth. You're not working on the layers. And when you have contact with the line, that's one of the things that I really learned with Art2ride, is when you lunge, to keep contact on the line. You're asking the horse to work towards the contact. And then when the horse comes up, you can add a little pressure, take a little bit more contact, and ask that inside hind leg underneath. And when you do that, you have a little pressure on the neck that opens up the throat, instead of, like, especially when the horse it has the tendency to go behind the bit, you really encourage them to push the neck down and out and work into the contact. And when they get older and they're better developed, you can start lunching on just attached to the bit. But I honestly don't really do that.
Well, it's fine attached to the inside ring when you have a side rein on. So when there's a rein on the outside, then you can just hook to the inside ring, and that works perfectly fine. But I agree, going over the top of the head is, if you don't have an outside line on, most of the time you want to go over the top of the head so that you can feel that even contact on both sides. And of course, always being careful that the line isn't, because sometimes the lines will get stuck under the headstall kind of thing. And so we always have to be sure that it's going right over the top of the headstall and that it doesn't slide in and get caught so that it doesn't release. So that's the one point of when we work over the top of the pole like that, that you just have to be careful of. And when just to clarify that point, when you're saying contact, mostly what she means there is the slack is out of the line and you're feeling a positive contact, but it's not a pulling or yanking or this kind of thing.
No.
We're not holding her. She's not holding anything. It's just that there's no, there's no slack in the line. That's someone once described a horse having correct contact as like holding hands with a little child that you're walking with. So you don't want to crush it. And it can't crush you, not that a horse could pull pretty hard, but you get the idea that that's the kind of light feeling that you need in your hand. I always tell people, if you see my hand here, you want to have the first knuckle of your thumb up so that when you press down on this part of the rein, that you can hold the rein firmly there, but the rest of your fingers are acting like a spring so that you can open and close them like that. But this part up here, if you go like that and have your thumb this way, the reins tend to slide through your fingers. If you put your first knuckle up on your thumb like that, it lets you really hold down on the rein like that. So you know that you have a purchase there, as opposed to going like that, which makes it slide. So a little point there that helps you to have correct contact.
Yeah. What I do with the launching, actually, like if I would launch my horse on the left rein, I hold the horse and the whip in my right hand, and with my left hand I just slide over the line, and that's how I maintain contact. Because if I hold it, some have the tendency to pull. I just slide over the line. If the horse asks for more rein, I can just very easily, with millimeters, I can let it go and pick up. And when the horse comes up, I can just move my hand to the side, and there's a little bit more pressure there, and I can ask them to come down. And as soon as they stretch, I can let go. So that really helps me to keep the connection really soft and smooth, and also be there on time when they're already to maintain that contact there. So then Sarah is asking, when you're building up the horse, is it okay to get on and just take a walk, even though my horse is still being developed properly? And she's asking this because her trainer is encouraging her to ride. For me, I find it a very difficult question to answer because I haven't seen the horse. Some people are very, very careful with their horse, and sometimes like a little walk out, especially because the horses tend to get a little bit more active outside. It could actually help them get through their bodies. If you go out on a little hack there, I wouldn't trot them if you're not sure whether your horse is moving properly, but in a walk, if they're active outside, I would actually encourage that. But it's really hard to say if you haven't seen a horse.
Well, the rule is if the horse can hold you up, okay? If you're walking the horse and the horse literally can't, if it can't stretch down and lift you up a little bit in the saddle, there's no point in doing it. And you've got to understand that every step you take, like doing anything badly, whenever you do anything badly, it encourages you to keep doing it badly. So if the horse can, in the walk, get its back up and stretch down and keep a nice rhythm, once again, remember that the rhythm shouldn't change. So if you can get a nice stretching walk out of the horse, that's what it should be when you're on its back. If it's not, then don't. So if your horse can't lift you up to some degree and stretch out in front of you, I don't care what your trainer is saying, you're wasting your time, because all you're doing is encouraging the horse to go hollow. So that is the rule. The back, not the neck. The neck can be on the ground. We ride horses as soon as they can stretch all the way down, as long as we feel that the back can stay up while we do it. And normally with horses that aren't extremely sway back, and that's the other thing, if your horse is sway back, forget it. I mean, you need to do the work from the ground until the back comes up and heels. Then you can start riding all you like. But if you start riding before the back has come up with a sway back horse, you're just undoing the work that you just did. So, it's just the mentality that people have that if you're not riding, that you're not doing something. Well, and of course the trainer, I'm sure, wants to give you lessons. So she wants you to pay her for a lesson. So she wants you on the horse and going. So that's the only issue. Like, what is the trainer's real goal with insisting that you get on and ride? Is it just that she wants you to, to get in a lesson or something to that effect? So keep that in mind. If you get on the horse, can keep a good swinging walk, then by all means, take it out, walk it all you like, as long as the back can stay up. But when the back drops and can't support you any longer, I mean, I can't tell you how many times I got off of horses out fox hunting and walked back 5 miles because the horse just couldn't carry me anymore. You know, and when you're out doing something like fox hunting, you know, and like on a particular day where we've had a long run, you know, and we've done a lot of fences, you know, the horse is exhausted. So you get up and you walk them. A real horseman gets off and walks their horse when the horse can't carry them correctly anymore. So that's it.
Very clear. And so, yeah, also for Sarah, because you asked before, like, you know, if there's something that you can change with your activity, especially when you walk them either in hand or on the lunge, make sure that you activate them. Like in the walk, I always say, like, they need to be in the pace that you're on a hack outside on your way home. Like the horse really wants to move. And the more you get to that point, the easier they will come through their bodies, and the earlier they just, you know, get better there.
Yeah.
So we're running a little bit through the questions. So sorry, what were you saying?
I was just saying, just the idea of, you know, always do what you can do correctly. If you can't do, there's some level at which you can work the horse correctly. And that means, and sometimes that's not on their back. But if you can get it going, once again, if you can get a decent swing in the walk and the horse will stretch out in front of you and lift its back a little bit, then do all that you like until the horse starts to collapse. And when they start to feel the back collapse again, you're starting to have to push the horse a couple of more steps and then you're finished. Yeah. Okay.
Cool.
So if there are no more questions.
No, I don't think so. I'm not seeing any questions anymore. So
I hope everybody has enjoyed this morning. We'll maybe do this again in a couple of weeks. Yes.
Yeah, I would love that.
Enjoying this process, and we'll come up with a new set of questions. If we didn't answer anything, be sure and put it up there, and we'll try to answer it later on or the next one. But I want to thank Sabina here for going to the trouble of organizing all this, and everybody who tuned in for us today. And if you didn't see it today, you will be able to. We'll get this posted on the websites as well, so it can be seen at other times. Yeah.
Cool. I'm going to make the video ready, and I will send it to you soon.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining us this morning. See you next time. Thanks again. Have a great day. Bye-bye. Thanks, Sabina.
Bye. Bye.
All right.